What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that highlights leadership. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the President of the United States. Whether in 2 months that's the Donald or Mike Pence, who's to say? Certainly not me. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from whether rock-bottom interest rates have threatened our financial stability to the country's cybersecurity vulnerability, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Christine Alexander, the CEO of Carers Trust East Midlands. Christine started her career as a care support worker and has worked her way up the organisation, bringing her experience and passion for the role with her. CTEM clearly understands and intends to be at the forefront in reforming the sector, and we learn not only how they have achieved their success in often trying circumstances, but how they plan to expand in the future. Christine, welcome.
Hello, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, I know it's been a few months since Carers Trust East Midlands has obviously been in the review. I think it might be a nice place to start if you could let the listeners know what you and the team have been up to since.
Yes, it's been a busy few months, and in the article I mentioned that we would be potentially looking at our name. Carers Trust East Midlands does not really reflect where we operate anymore. We've got services all over the country, so we're in the process of rebranding, which is a huge task, and I'm about to embark on road shows next week. We're going around all of our areas to meet with all of our teams and to talk to them about the new brand, the new name, and what we expect to happen over the next few months. The official date of change is actually the 14th of February. It wasn't intended to be Valentine's Day, but there you go. So we're very excited about starting a new chapter in the organisation's history.
And I suppose it's a little too early for me to try and get at what the new name might be.
Indeed, yes.
Well,
it's embargoed. I've been given strict instructions.
I'll certainly make sure we can set up a date for the 14th then, Christine, and talk about it then. I know then it's a very busy time for you. The rebranding process is never as simple as one might think it is, but perhaps if we can pivot over to the fundamentals of the company, regardless of the name. I know you're all big believers in providing a system of integrated care. And what are the key elements of your approach providing care, young and older alike, that has ensured the success you've had?
Well, I think the key factor in providing integrated care is having key stakeholders in anybody's journey of care or caring for someone to actually come together and talk to each other. We've lived in a society for a long time where if somebody has needs, the approach to meeting those needs has been about what we can impart on that person or where we can take that person to in order to get the care that they need. People's expectations have changed, and over the last 20 or 30 years, certainly since I've been doing this job, I've seen a huge shift in the expectations of the families that we work with. Generally, it's husbands looking after wives or vice versa, or it's children looking after aging parents. And if we don't keep abreast of the changes that we need to make in order to deliver care in a different way, then people are going to forever be disappointed with the services that they can expect to get when they and their family are in need.
So perhaps now more than ever, it's very much is a case of providing, or at least trying to, the most personalised care on a case-by-case basis as one can.
It is, and again, I mentioned in my article that there's so much media coverage around health and social care. There are so many challenges, and in fact, it would be very easy, and it is easy for us all to think about trying to apportion blame in a situation like this. There have been huge spending cuts that have affected health and social care sector. But the truth is, we have a fundamentally ageing population.
Yes.
And when people live longer, they generally develop some sort of long-term condition that requires them to need some sort of help. Now, in fact, I think it was CQC that cited Age UK recently, who said that there are 1.4 million older people, that's 1 in 7, who actually do not have access to the care and support that they need. And that's now. So that's only going to get worse as time goes on. So we're in a situation where I don't think there's ever going to be enough money. We could throw all the money at it in the world, and I don't think we would solve it. The NHS and the local authority welfare service system is like a juggernaut. It's such a monstrous organisation, and trying to affect whole system change is extraordinarily difficult. So it is my view that those of us that work in this sector, we need to find more of a bottom-up approach, a groundswell of change that comes from changing what we've done in the past and doing things in a different way. We need national solutions delivered to local areas, where at the moment we've got local commissioning, but we've got national problems.
And I think, as you've pointed out, Christine, it is simple. It's an inevitable fact that because of Britain's demographics, the demand, if it's not already, will be outstripping supply when it comes to this. And it does require, and it will require, national attention. Setting aside maybe the politics of it for a second, what sort of solutions would you like to see talked about and being introduced over the next couple of years?
Well, face-to-face care out in the community is very, very expensive. You have the issue of the logistical issue of getting people from A to B and all of the organisation that goes behind that. You've got the issue of transport, time to transport, etc., etc. I could go on and explain why it's so difficult to deliver face-to-face care. But the truth is that if you are caring for somebody out in the community, they don't always need face-to-face care. At the moment, there isn't another solution. If somebody needs support during the night, then one has to put somebody in that home for the whole of the night. Truth is, they don't need help all night. They're asleep for most of it. But we don't have a solution that enables us at this time to put the most expensive resources right at the very point where they are most needed, and therefore find a less expensive way of supporting people for all of that other time where they might be isolated, lonely. They need a meal making for them, or a cup of tea, or somebody to help get them out for a little walk each day and to entertain themselves within their local communities. So we need people who are able to think about solutions in a more global way, to come together and to start to think about how can we create solutions that are not just small pockets of innovation, because that will never affect enough of a change. We need solutions that are more global. So, for example, meeting the needs of our ambulance services, who are so under-resourced. And so much of their time, I believe, is wasted because they have call-outs to scenarios where one could argue that an ambulance may not be needed. Is there something that can be done to support our real sharp-end emergency services in order that these expensive resources can actually be used when they are most needed? Now, we have an army in this country of volunteers, an army of them, but we don't know how to garner the support that people are willing to give within their local communities. And if I might just go off at a very slight tangent. Last week I was with my senior leadership team in a small village in Yorkshire. We take our team out and about. They're from all over the country, and instead of always going to London, we try and take our business to rural villages. This particular village has a population of around 1,000 people, and the hub of this village is the local pub, run by an extremely competent landlord and an owner who used to work in London. And they have 6 or 7 people in the village who are alone, who have needs. And this community hub and the pub look after these people. They bring them in for lunch on Christmas Day. If they don't turn up at the pub at some point during the day, they go to their cottages to look for them and see if they're okay. Now, nothing's spoken, nothing's written down, nothing is paid for. It's a community service that is almost instinctual to these people.
Yes.
Now, if we could garner the willingness and the compassion that there is within our country and actually point it in the areas where it's most needed, I do believe that we could make a difference to how we use the resources in this country.
And it's a fantastic comparison, I think, because I think, as we all know, this country, the people of this country have got big hearts, and we'll never be short of people that are wanting to help. It's just a case of enabling them to do so.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you'd be one of the key resources, of course, in the sector, Christine, are those frontline carers, a lot of whom, perhaps do not get, and certainly don't really, the attention from policymakers or indeed the respect they often deserve. I know that you've helped to professionalise the role, whether that's from full-time salaries, fixed shift patterns, little things that you can carry a lot of weight. How do you see, especially when it comes to that and the recruitment of them, as key to ensuring a smooth operation when it comes to this?
It's a real difficult conundrum because we have a reducing workforce at the moment. Around 440,000 people leave the sector or have left the sector in the last 12 months. So there's a turnover rate of around 30.8%, which is very high.
Staggeringly high.
It is, yeah, it is. And at any one time in the UK, there are 122,000 jobs in the social care sector, which is it's mind-blowing.
Yes.
So we have a lot of work still to do. There has been a lot of media attention on these zero-hour contracts and the way that they have been abused. Now, the truth is some people actually like them. It gives them flexibility, particularly young mums who want to work a certain number of hours a week and need that flexibility.
I think the vast majority, I think, of people on zero are fans of them.
Yes, that's right. But they're not to be abused.
Absolutely.
And providing there is an option for people to choose whether they want to work on a salary, part-time or full-time, or whether they want that flexibility, then I have no option with those contracts. The issue is that there is still an undervaluing of care in this country. There are some local authorities that I won't name, but they pay their dog walkers in their county more than they pay for social care, which is really quite shocking. I know that if I was trying to buy care for my own mom, I would certainly want to know that she was worth more than the local dogs in the community. And but nevertheless, there is not enough money to go around. We need to optimise our services. Like any industry, there's an awful lot of wastage. We have a workforce who are out and about, so they're travelling all over the place. They're using their cars. They're going miles sometimes to get to people that are in rural communities. So if we can find a way to optimise what we do, to do as much as we can to reduce our costs, then it enables us to put that money where it's most needed, and that's with our workforce, which makes these roles more attractive. It isn't just getting people into this sector, it's the way that we look after them. And again, the work that they do out in the communities is extraordinarily difficult. Sometimes when they're caring for people who have severe dementia, they're out there, they're on their own, they're dealing with complex and challenging situations, and they have no backup apart from a telephone. So we don't value this workforce as much as we should. And I think that the risks that come with these roles, and again, we've seen the media attention of Winterbourne and all the abuse that there has been within the social care sector, it puts people off. Of course it does, because they know that they're at risk when they're one-on-one with people in their homes or out in the community. So we've still a long way to go with our workforce, but we as an organisation are trying very hard to put simple measures in place that ensure that our workforce feel valued, that they know that there's career progression within our organisation, which for many of them is important, but equally that they can make the choice about the type of job they do, how many hours they work, so that it fits with their own personal circumstances.
And it's a model, Christine, I think, for so many organisations in the sector to follow. It's an exceptionally good one, and one that clearly is at your end working. Now, I'm conscious that we're speaking at the moment, Christine, in the midst of a general election that has no doubt ruined everybody's Christmas, but here we are. So it would be remiss of me perhaps not to discuss it now. And I think perhaps I don't want to put you on the spot here, Christine, but let us imagine you had a bit of a wish list and you could put it into the Conservatives and Labour Party's manifesto. What would you want to see? What commitment would you like from the main parties in helping the sector out, not just the next 5 years, but indeed the next couple of decades?
Extremely good question, because the next couple of decades is probably the length of time that we need to look at in terms of solving some of these problems. There is no quick fix for the situation that we're in. And we have been through an extraordinarily interesting few months, which have left us all, I think, wondering what's going to come next. So we wait with anticipation. But for the health and social care sector, I think the only thing that I would want to see is that there is a real enthusiasm for bringing people together to talk openly about the issues and to start thinking about what those solutions might be. There is no quick fix. It cannot be solved within 5 years. So whatever political party we find we are committed to on the 10th of December, we actually need to think beyond the terms of any political party and bring together people from all parties who are interested in finding a better way to care for our most vulnerable citizens. That's not going to be easy to do.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's about asking for money. I truly don't. And a lot of people out there would disagree with me, but we could throw a lot of money at this issue and it wouldn't make a lot of difference. I think we need to look at this differently. It's like when you have a blowout on the motorway and your wheel is shredded. You can't mend that wheel. We need to find another way to do something new and different that's going to last for longer than 5 years, longer than 10 years, and see us into the future.
And I think the idea of a cross-party, let's say, Royal Commission on this perhaps isn't maybe as far-fetched as people might think. We only have to look back at the last general election, which admittedly was only 2 years ago, but we only have to look back to there where the Conservatives' flagship social care policy went down in flames. And I think there's now a genuine fear among the main parties to err on the side of caution, not say anything at all for risk of the electorate being angry with them. And so,
you're quite right.
Yes, and so we were now in this dilemma of either they get their acts together, come together with a commission perhaps, and go from there, or indeed come up with no policy whatsoever.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. The vacuum of any mention of support for our current crisis, I think, is evidence that many people in central government just don't know what to do. And I do sympathise with that. It is an immense problem. And for those of us that have worked in this sector for most of our lives, it's hard to think of how to solve it. So for politicians, it must be inordinately difficult to know what to do, which is why I think the only way to tackle this is to bring together people that are brave enough to have the open and honest discussions about what we're going to do, in the future to start to think about solving these problems.
Well, we won't have long to wait, Christine, to find out, but we'll see what happens.
We will.
Now, I'm conscious of the time as well. I think it might be a superb way to end just before we look at the plans you have until the rebranding in February. You, Christine, have spent a career doing what you do, thinking about it every day. It's become a passion, no doubt. What have been the guiding principles in what you do, and what would be the key lesson you would pass on to those that perhaps are either thinking of joining or starting or getting involved with the sector?
It's probably one of the hardest jobs I could ever imagine doing, and yet one of the most rewarding. I didn't intend to end up doing what I'm doing today, but I wouldn't change a thing. And the things that people joining this sector need to think about are what they would want to see within their own families. It's a fact that most of us, at some point in our lives, are going to find ourselves in a situation where either we or somebody within our family is going to need care. And that's horrifying to think about what that might be and when it might be, that it affects us and our families. But the only way that we can measure what we should do for others is really what we would expect for ourselves, for our parents and for our children if we were in that situation. And it's so sad to see that whether it's within social care or within our health service, there are so many stories of the most horrifying situations that we read, we look at, that we see them every day, and it's almost becoming normalised, which is not where we should be going. There is an immense amount of compassion in this country within people, but I think that people just don't know how to use it, express it, or channel it. And if we can just harness a part of that and start thinking about how we can bring people together, whether it's our own workforce, whether it's people within our local communities who support us, or whether it's our politicians, whoever it is, everybody in this country at some point is going to be faced with this issue. It was only just a few days ago when my very, very close friend phoned me and said, "Christine, what do I do? What do I do? My husband's mum has been discharged from hospital. They can't get her out of bed. They can't get her out of bed. What do we do? Where do we go?" It was a Saturday. Fortunately, I knew what to do and I knew how to support them. But how many people are out there who don't know what to do and they don't have any access?
They don't have a Christine to call.
That's right. That's right.
Well, it's no doubt the great policy challenge that this country faces right now. And let's hope we can get it together. Christine, I know obviously that with the rebranding in February, you will be very busy over the next couple of months. Dare I ask, do you think how many different stops on the roadshow you'll be participating in?
The latest count was 19, so it's going to be a busy few weeks between now and Christmas. But there's nothing more rewarding than standing in a room and seeing so many people who are part of our organisation and are so committed to what they do. There's nothing more rewarding for me.
Super. Well, look, perhaps once that's all out of the way, we can speak again. But Christine, for now, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Christine, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Carers Trust East Midlands are continuing to raise standards. We'll be on tenterhooks here for the rebranding, and I look forward to speaking to Christine again soon. If you haven't heard it before, though, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that, no. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something, and it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40-odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to happen, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I've found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well, I
was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay for to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxist to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story. Most people might guess that a dialogue Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
That Che Guevara. which always, I always had them over my left shoulder of visitors, and they always used to kind of, you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservative had never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech that we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying that the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress it. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and warband. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we're not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think it very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let listeners know what projects you are working with and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, of 7 years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death counts. And we need to kind of understand the Anstaltgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy because the former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you quite unscathed from it.
I can't. He was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out 1 or 2 of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time. But I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years. And it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress. And it would be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know this is going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm after the barley mow to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk. Great.